and it has U.S. hegemonic leadership in it, certainly in the early decades. So there's an old order with principles and logic and characteristics. It's also anchored in big institutions: NATO, the UN, Bretton Woods, the WTO, U.S.-Asian alliances, U.S.-Japan, Korea, and so forth, on down into Southeast Asia, the G7, the G8, and lots of informal networks and layers of institutions on top of all those I mentioned. In the background, there are bargains. The U.S. would provide security, extended deterrence, would, in a sense, be a kind of umbrella for security cooperation across the Atlantic and the Pacific, and would, in some sense, be a manager of the system to maintain on the economic side. There's openness. The dollar became the important sort of currency of commerce. The world economy was anchored in that commitment to open markets. And so you had a kind of hegemonic system where you had agreed upon rules and institutions, collaboration, and lots of moving parts, but a very complex and sophisticated system that was mostly accidental, quite frankly. It came out of the Cold War years. It emerged in the shadow of the Cold War. It's also been amazingly successful. Think about it. Over the last 50 years, this system I've just described was the basis for opening the world economy after World War II, ushering in the golden age of growth that we've been in and perhaps are out of, integrated Germany and Japan, which is still extraordinary, two enemies that almost like turning on a dime became integrated, and the second and third largest economies in the world for several generations now have been locomotives and agents of this larger system. Extraordinary, really, way in which it's integrated these great powers. Found a solution to the European problem, the Franco-German problem, 3 wars in 70 years. There was an innovative way of finding a place for Germany without upsetting Europe, binding these states together, the coal and steel community. A quiet revolution. I would say, I say it to my students, the most important revolution of world politics in the 20th century was the Franco-German resolution. We can go on about the accomplishments of this system. Brought transitioning countries into the order over the last 30-year period. 500 million people were lifted out of poverty as they came into this globalizing system. And finally, this system, the West and its extended presence, was part of ending the Cold War peacefully on favorable terms, but not exploitive, not Versailles-type terms, at least the vision wasn't. Overall, this Western system, it has had a great run. It's arguably been the most successful order, measured in terms of physical security, wealth creation, and a sense of, or a hope for justice. So compare it to past historical orders, other regions, it looks pretty good. But it is, of course, in a transition period. But before we talk about the transition, let me just say why I think it's got more life in it than many people think. There's continuity as well as change afoot. Number one, we live in the longest period of great power peace in modern history. The longest period when the great powers, which we can define, have not been fighting directly since 1945. This is obviously partly due to the advent of deterrence, nuclear deterrence. It's partly because most of those great powers are democracies and they don't fight each other. But we live in this kind of incredibly stable system that has given the system a chance to kind of build roots and interdependencies that have made it more of a system that persists. It's a unique order. This is what some of my own work has done over the years to kind of describe what this is. The bumper sticker I use is it's an order that's easy to join and hard to overturn. That is to say, it's very integrative. You can bring countries into it. It's kind of got universal docking facilities, if you will. Think about Japan. Think about Germany unified and integrated into the EC and into NATO. We're coming up on the 20th anniversary, November 9th, the wall went down, and to everybody's surprise, Chancellor Kohl was pushing for unification. Thatcher was aghast. Mitterrand was worried. Gorbachev was stunned. And as this very compressed but intense diplomacy unfolded, NATO and the EC became the vehicles for reassuring everybody who was worried. Germany would be, as Genscher said, it would be a European Germany, not a German Europe, and it would be bound to these institutions. That is something we just take for granted. Shared leadership, it's not an imperial system. Spoils of modernity have been widely shared. Rising states, moreover, those that are in some sense rising up and looking at the system, don't constitute a bloc. China, India, Russia, Brazil, South Africa, they're all kind of different. There is a BRIC association. They met once, I think maybe in India, I'm not sure. But I don't think this is a bloc in the making. All are capitalist, most are democratic, but they have different geopolitical interests regarding energy, religion, ideologies of development, and so forth. Moreover, why, again, more reasons for continuity. There are alignments of interest among the great powers. All the great powers, including Russia, except on the boundary questions, are all status quo states. All are worried about radicalism and failed states. The new security threats are ones that bring the old great powers and the rising great powers together. China and the US share a worry about energy security, environmental threats. They had this great meeting. The Chinese brought 150 officials to Washington in, I think it was July, and they signed this agreement for bilateral R&D cooperation on energy, energy and environment. There's reason to think that there will be engagement, not just competition. The declining benefits of conquest, the collapse of ideological rivalry, all of these are helping to define this great power world we live in. So overall, there is a general pathway to modernity. Fascism, communism, theocratic dictatorships can't get you there. In effect, if you want to be a great power, you've got to join the WTO. The US and the West will decline in world share, but the existing order still provides benefits to most states. Now, obviously, there are shifts afoot. The world is evolving even as we speak. And let me just mention what I think are the deep drivers. The end of the Cold War clearly has been a slow motion shift that is continuing to work today. The inside system became the outside system. The Western system, when the Soviets collapsed, became the global system. We call it globalization. Through open security questions, the future of alliances became a topic. The debate about threats, do we have the same threat assessment? Not as easy to say. Raised identity questions. Who are we? Are we still on the same team? There's no longer a free world but when everybody's free. So identity questions of why are we together? And it ushered in a difficult relationship with Russia. And let me just say something about that. Russia and the U.S. had a very remarkable embrace at the end of the Cold War, a vision that Russia would take risks of reform and join the modern system with a progressive international agenda of arms control, environment, development. There would be cooperation, it would be a partner, it would be joining the system. It was not simply defeated and had to go down and be kind of under the thumb of the West. There really was a sense that it was a new kind of partnership.